The morning mist clung to the peaks of the Colorado Rockies, like a shroud, obscuring the jagged ridgelines that had claimed so many secrets over the decades. Detective Sarah Martinez pulled her jacket tighter as she stood outside the weathered cabin in Nederland, Colorado, staring at the evidence bag containing a hand-drawn map that had just surfaced after 16 long years. The paper was yellowed and brittle, marked with symbols and notations that made her stomach turn cold. If you're watching this story unfold, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers around the world who are drawn to these mysterious cases that have shaped American families forever. The disappearance of the Caldwell brothers had haunted Boulder County since the autumn of 1982. 23-year-old Marcus and 19-year-old Danny Caldwell had set out on what should have been a routine 3-day hiking expedition in the Roosevelt National Forest, armed with enough supplies, experience, and brotherly determination to conquer the challenging terrain near Ward, Colorado. Their parents, Robert and Helen Caldwell, had watched them drive away in Marcus's blue Ford pickup truck on a crisp October morning, never imagining it would be the last time they'd see their sons alive. The brothers were no strangers to the mountains. Marcus, a geology student at the University of Colorado Boulder, had spent countless weekends mapping rock formations and studying the mineral deposits that made the Colorado Rockies a geologist's paradise. Danny, though younger and more impetuous, possessed an innate understanding of wilderness survival that impressed even seasoned park rangers. Together, they formed a formidable team, complementing each other's strengths and covering each other's weaknesses with the unspoken bond that only brothers share. Their planned route would take them through some of the most spectacular yet treacherous terrain in the Front Range. Starting from the Nederland Reservoir, they intended to hike north toward the Indian Peaks wilderness, following a combination of established trails and off-trail routes that Marcus had been studying for months. The area was known for its sudden weather changes, hidden crevasses, and disorienting terrain that could turn even experienced hikers around in circles. But the Caldwell brothers had prepared meticulously, studying topographical maps, checking weather forecasts, and informing their parents of their exact itinerary. When they failed to return on the expected Sunday evening, their parents initially weren't concerned. The boys had extended hiking trips before, especially when Marcus became fascinated by a particular geological formation or when weather conditions forced them to take shelter. But by Tuesday morning, with no word from either son, Robert Caldwell contacted the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The search and rescue operation that followed was one of the largest in Colorado history. Teams of volunteers, professional rescuers, and fellow students from the university combed every inch of the designated search area. Helicopters circled the peaks for weeks, their rotors echoing off canyon walls as they searched for any sign of the missing brothers. The Colorado National Guard was called in, bringing sophisticated equipment and additional manpower to expand the search radius far beyond the brothers' intended route. Search teams found Marcus's truck exactly where it was supposed to be, parked at the Nederland Reservoir trailhead with no signs of disturbance. Their camping equipment was gone, confirming they had indeed set out on their planned expedition. But beyond that initial discovery, the mountains seemed to have swallowed the young men without a trace. No torn clothing, no abandoned backpacks, no emergency signals, nothing to indicate what might have happened to two experienced hikers who knew these mountains better than most. As days turned into weeks and weeks stretched into months, the official search was eventually scaled back, though it never officially ended. Robert and Helen Caldwell refused to give up, organizing civilian search parties every weekend throughout the following spring and summer. They posted flyers in every mountain town, from Nederland to Estes Park, offering a substantial reward for any information about their son's whereabouts. The local newspapers covered the story extensively, and the case became one of those haunting mysteries that mountain communities whispered about around campfires for years to come. The emotional toll on the Caldwell family was devastating. Helen, once a vibrant elementary school teacher who filled her classroom with laughter and learning, became a shadow of her former self. She would drive to the mountains almost daily, walking the same trails and calling out their names until her voice was hoarse. Robert, a practical man who had built a successful carpentry business with his hands and his integrity, found himself unable to concentrate on work, spending his days instead studying maps and weather reports, trying to piece together what might have gone wrong. Their younger daughter, Lisa, was only 16 when her brothers disappeared, and the family's grief transformed her adolescent years into something dark and complicated. She watched her parents disappear into their obsession with finding Marcus and Danny, leaving her to navigate high school and young adulthood essentially alone. The house that had once been filled with the sounds of 3 children laughing, arguing, and living became a shrine to the missing boys, frozen in time with their bedrooms left exactly as they had been on that October morning. Years passed with no new leads, no breakthrough discoveries, no closure for the family that had been torn apart by uncertainty. The case files grew thick with witness statements, search reports, and theories from amateur detectives who were convinced they could solve the mystery that had stumped professionals. Some speculated about bear attacks, though no evidence of animal involvement was ever found. Others suggested the brothers had simply gotten lost and succumbed to exposure, their bodies hidden in some remote canyon or beneath a rock slide. But Detective Martinez knew something that the earlier investigators hadn't. She had been assigned to cold cases for the Boulder County Sheriff's Office for the past 5 years, bringing fresh eyes and modern techniques to mysteries that had haunted the community for decades. When she first opened the Caldwell file in 1996, she was struck by the meticulous preparation the brothers had done and the complete absence of any trace of them after they entered the wilderness. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas Brennan, a veteran hiker and amateur historian who had been documenting abandoned mining claims throughout the Colorado Rockies, was exploring a remote area near Ward when he discovered what appeared to be the remnants of an old camp. Hidden beneath years of accumulated debris and partially concealed by fallen logs, he found a waterproof container wrapped in deteriorated canvas. Inside, preserved by the dry mountain air and the container's seal, was a hand-drawn map unlike anything he had ever seen. The map was clearly the work of someone with geological training, marked with precise elevation notations, mineral deposit indicators, and detailed topographical features. But what made Brennan's blood run cold were the other markings scattered across the paper: cryptic symbols, dates, and what appeared to be locations marked with ominous notations that suggested something far more sinister than a simple hiking accident. When Brennan brought the map to the authorities, Detective Martinez immediately recognized the handwriting as Marcus Caldwell's. She had studied enough samples of his geology notes and letters to be certain. But the content of the map raised questions that made her question everything the investigation had assumed about the brothers' disappearance 16 years earlier. The map revealed locations that were nowhere near the brothers' intended hiking route, areas that weren't even within the original search perimeter. More disturbing were the notations that suggested the brothers had discovered something in the mountains that they weren't supposed to find, something that might have cost them their lives. The symbols and codes scattered across the map appeared to reference mining operations, dates that extended far beyond their planned 3-day trip, and coordinates that led to areas known for their isolation and their history of violence during the mining boom of the late 1800s. Detective Martinez spread the map across her desk, studying every mark and notation with growing unease. After 16 years of assuming the Caldwell brothers had simply become another tragic statistic of the unforgiving Colorado wilderness, she was facing evidence that their disappearance might have been something far more deliberate and disturbing than anyone had ever imagined. The truth, she was beginning to realize, might be more chilling than the mountain winds that had been keeping their secrets for nearly 2 decades. And somewhere in those remote peaks and hidden valleys, the answers were waiting to finally emerge from the shadows where they had been buried for far too long. As she prepared to reopen the case that had destroyed one family and haunted an entire community, Detective Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something that would change everything they thought they knew about what happened to Marcus and Danny Caldwell in the autumn of 1982. The map contained details that didn't match any known hiking trails or geological surveys of the area. Detective Martinez had spent 3 sleepless nights analyzing every mark, comparing them to historical mining records and topographical surveys dating back to the 1880s. What she discovered made her hands tremble as she reached for the phone to call Robert Caldwell, now 68 years old, and still living in the same Boulder home where he had waited for his sons to return for 16 agonizing years. "Mr. Caldwell," she said when his weathered voice answered on the second ring, "this is Detective Martinez with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. I need to meet with you and your wife about Marcus and Danny's case. We've found something." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Martinez wondered if the connection had been lost. Finally, Robert's voice came through, barely a whisper. "You found them?" "Not exactly," Martinez replied carefully. "But we found something that changes everything we thought we knew about their disappearance. Can you and Helen come to the station this afternoon?" Within 2 hours, the Caldwells sat across from Detective Martinez in the same conference room where they had given their initial statement 16 years earlier. Helen had aged dramatically since the loss of her sons, her once auburn hair now completely grey, her green eyes dulled by years of grief and false hopes. Robert's hands, still calloused from decades of carpentry work, shook slightly as he held his wife's hand across the scarred wooden table. Martinez placed the preserved map between them, watching their faces carefully as they recognized their son's distinctive handwriting. Helen gasped and pressed her hand to her mouth, while Robert leaned forward, his eyes scanning the familiar geological notations that were so characteristic of Marcus's meticulous work. "This was found 3 days ago by a hiker in an area about 15 miles from where your sons were supposed to be hiking," Martinez explained. "The location where it was discovered wasn't anywhere near their planned route, and some of these markings suggest they were in the mountains much longer than their intended 3-day trip." Robert traced one of the marked locations with his finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These coordinates," he said slowly. "I recognize this area. It's near some of the old silver mines that were abandoned after the crash of 1893. Marcus had talked about wanting to explore that region, but I told him it was too dangerous. The mine shafts aren't stable, and there are stories about people going missing in those areas, going back over a century." Helen looked up from the map, her eyes filling with tears. "You think they went looking for something they shouldn't have found?" Martinez nodded grimly. "The markings on this map suggest your sons discovered evidence of current mining activity in an area that's been officially closed to commercial operations for over 50 years. Some of these notations appear to be recording dates and activities that extended well beyond October 1982. If I'm interpreting this correctly, Marcus and Danny may have stumbled upon an illegal mining operation. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Illegal mining operations in the Colorado mountains weren't unheard of, especially in remote areas where oversight was minimal. But such operations were typically run by dangerous people who would go to great lengths to protect their secrets, especially from curious geology students who might recognize the signs of valuable mineral extraction. "There's something else," Martinez continued, pulling out a folder containing enlarged photographs of specific sections of the map. "These symbols here don't match any standard geological or surveying notations. We've consulted with experts at the Colorado School of Mines, and they believe these might be codes or markers used by whoever was running the operation your sons discovered." Robert studied the symbols, his face growing pale. Danny was always good with codes and puzzles. If they felt threatened, if they knew they were in danger, Marcus might have taught Danny to document everything in a way that wouldn't be immediately obvious to anyone who found their notes. The realization that his sons might have known they were in mortal danger, that they had tried to leave behind evidence of what they had discovered, was almost too much for Robert to bear. He pushed back from the table, walking to the window that overlooked the parking lot, where 16 years ago he had pleaded with search and rescue coordinators to expand their efforts. Martinez gave him a moment before continuing. "We're organizing a new search operation focused on the areas marked on this map. The technology we have now is far more advanced than what was available in 1982. Ground-penetrating radar, GPS positioning, satellite imagery, we have tools that might help us find evidence that was missed during the original search." Helen's voice was barely audible when she spoke. "Do you think you'll find them?" "I think we'll find answers," Martinez replied honestly. "Whether those answers will bring your sons home is something I can't promise. But after 16 years of not knowing, I believe we owe it to your family and to Marcus and Danny to discover the truth about what happened in those mountains." The following morning, Martinez assembled a team that included modern search and rescue specialists, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Colorado, and 2 experts in historical mining operations. They also brought along advanced equipment that hadn't existed during the original search: digital metal detectors capable of distinguishing between different types of minerals, ground-penetrating radar that could locate buried objects or structures, and GPS units that could pinpoint locations with accuracy measured in feet rather than miles. The team's first destination was the area where the map had been discovered, a remote valley accessible only by a challenging 4-mile hike through terrain that became increasingly difficult as they climbed toward the tree line. The location was so isolated that even experienced hikers rarely ventured there, making it an ideal place for illegal activities that required secrecy. As they approached the coordinates marked most prominently on Marcus's map, the team began to notice signs that confirmed their suspicions. Subtle disturbances in the landscape suggested heavy equipment had been moved through the area decades earlier. Careful examination revealed partially concealed access roads that had been deliberately disguised but were still visible to trained eyes. Most telling were the traces of mineral residue that the mining expert identified as consistent with silver and lead extraction. "This is definitely the site of a significant mining operation," confirmed Dr. Patricia Wells, the mining historian they had brought along. "Based on the evidence I'm seeing, this operation was active for at least several months, possibly longer. The equipment they used was substantial. This wasn't some small-scale prospecting operation. Someone invested serious money and resources into extracting minerals from this site." The team set up their base camp in the same location where Thomas Brennan had discovered the map, using it as a central point from which to explore the various coordinates marked on Marcus's diagram. Each location they visited revealed additional evidence of the illegal mining operation: abandoned equipment hidden beneath years of natural debris, partially filled excavation sites, and, most disturbing of all, signs of a permanent camp that had housed workers for an extended period. At the fourth location they investigated, ground-penetrating radar detected what appeared to be a large buried structure approximately 8 feet below the current ground level. The readings suggested something metallic and substantial, possibly equipment or containers that had been deliberately buried and concealed. But as the team prepared to begin careful excavation, they made a discovery that changed the entire nature of their search. Partially hidden beneath a fallen tree that had clearly been placed there intentionally, they found the remains of what had once been a small camp. Among the scattered debris were fragments of camping equipment that matched the descriptions of gear the Caldwell brothers had been carrying when they disappeared. More significantly, they discovered Marcus's geology field notebook, its pages damaged by years of exposure but still partially readable. The notebook entries began normally, documenting rock formations and mineral samples in Marcus's careful scientific handwriting. But as Detective Martinez read through the surviving pages, the tone of the entries changed dramatically. The final readable entries described the brothers' discovery of the mining operation, their growing realization that they had stumbled upon something dangerous, and their decision to document everything they could before attempting to leave the area. One entry, dated 6 days after the brothers were supposed to have returned home, was particularly chilling. "They know we've seen too much. Danny thinks we can make it out through the North Canyon, but they're watching the trails. If something happens to us, the map shows everything. Someone needs to know what's happening up here." The evidence was mounting that Marcus and Danny Caldwell hadn't simply gotten lost or succumbed to the elements. They had discovered an illegal operation, attempted to document it, and had been prevented from leaving the area to report what they had found. The question that remained was what had ultimately happened to them, and whether their remains might still be somewhere in these remote mountains, waiting to be discovered after 16 years of silence. As the sun began to set behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley where so many secrets lay buried, Detective Martinez realized that they were no longer just searching for 2 missing hikers. They were investigating what appeared to be a double murder that had been covered up for over a decade and a half, hidden in one of the most remote and beautiful locations in Colorado. The excavation of the buried structure began at dawn the following day, with Dr. Sarah Chen, the forensic anthropologist, supervising every step of the careful digging process. What they uncovered sent shockwaves through the entire investigation team and would ultimately rewrite the official record of what had happened to the Caldwell brothers in the autumn of 1982. 8 feet below the surface, preserved by the dry mountain soil and metallic containers, they found a cache of documents that told the complete story of the illegal mining operation. The papers revealed that a consortium of investors from Denver had been secretly extracting silver and rare earth minerals from the closed government land for over 3 years, using falsified permits and bribed officials to maintain their operations. The profits were enormous, with millions of dollars worth of precious metals being removed from the mountains and sold through legitimate mining companies that helped launder the stolen resources. More disturbing were the security reports contained within the cache, detailing how the operation dealt with unwanted visitors who might threaten their activities. The documents described a systematic approach to eliminating witnesses, including detailed plans for disposing of evidence and bodies in the numerous abandoned mine shafts that dotted the region. The reports were signed by someone identified only as the coordinator, whose real identity would become central to solving the mystery of the Caldwell brothers' fate. Among the buried documents was a security log that made Detective Martinez's blood run cold. An entry dated October 18th, 1982, exactly 1 week after Marcus and Danny were supposed to have returned home, described the neutralization of 2 civilian witnesses and the successful containment of security breach. The clinical language couldn't disguise what had happened. The Caldwell brothers had been murdered to protect the illegal mining operation. But the most heartbreaking discovery came when the team found a second notebook, this one belonging to Danny Caldwell. Unlike his older brother's scientific observations, Danny's entries revealed the terror and desperation the young men had experienced during their final days. His writing described how they had initially been captured while trying to leave the area, held prisoner while the operations leaders decided what to do with them, and ultimately given a chance to escape that they both realized was likely a trap. "Marcus thinks they're going to hunt us," one of Danny's final entries read, "like we're animals. He's trying to leave clues for whoever finds us someday. I just want to go home and see Mom and Dad again. If anyone reads this, tell them we tried to do the right thing." The evidence trail led the investigation team to focus on identifying the coordinator, the mysterious figure who had overseen the security operations that resulted in the brothers' deaths. Cross-referencing the dates and details from the buried documents with law enforcement records from the early 1980s, Detective Martinez discovered that several other hikers and campers had gone missing in the same general area during the years when the mining operation was active. The pattern was chilling. Young, physically capable individuals who might have posed a threat to the operation's secrecy had vanished without a trace, their disappearances attributed to the natural hazards of mountain recreation. The Caldwell brothers weren't the only victims. They were simply the most thoroughly documented case because of Marcus's geological expertise and his habit of keeping detailed records. Working with FBI agents who specialized in organized crime from the 1980s, Martinez began to piece together the identities of the people involved in the illegal mining operation. The investigation revealed connections to a network of corrupt officials, legitimate mining companies that served as fronts for the operation, and a security team led by a man named Vincent "Vinny" Torino, a former military contractor who had earned a reputation for ruthless efficiency in protecting his clients' interests. Torino, they discovered, was still alive and living under an assumed name in Nevada, where he had been operating a legitimate security consulting business for the past decade. When confronted with the evidence from the Colorado mountains, he initially denied any involvement in the illegal mining operation, but faced with overwhelming documentation and the possibility of federal charges for multiple murders, he eventually agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. His confession filled in the final horrifying details of what had happened to Marcus and Danny Caldwell. According to Torino, the brothers had been captured on their 4th day in the mountains, after they had already documented extensive evidence of the mining operation. The decision to eliminate them hadn't been made lightly, but the operation was too valuable to risk exposure, and the young men had seen too much to be allowed to leave. They were smart kids, Torino told investigators during his videotaped confession. The older one, Marcus, he knew exactly what he was looking at. He could have brought the whole operation down with what he'd documented. We gave them a chance to walk away and forget what they'd seen, but they refused, said they had an obligation to report it. That's when the decision was made. The brothers had been held at the main camp for 2 days while Torino's team decided their fate. During that time, Marcus had managed to complete his coded map and hide additional evidence, hoping that someone would eventually discover the truth about what had happened to them. On their final night, the brothers were told they were being released, but instead were led to an abandoned mine shaft where they were killed and their bodies disposed of in the deep underground chambers that had claimed so many lives during the mining boom of the 1800s. Torino provided detailed directions to the mine shaft where the brothers' remains had been disposed of, located in a remote area nearly 20 miles from their original hiking route. The shaft was part of a complex network of tunnels that had been abandoned for over a century, making it an ideal location for permanently hiding evidence of the mining operation's crimes. The recovery operation that followed was one of the most challenging in Colorado history. Specialized cave rescue teams had to navigate unstable shafts and dangerous underground chambers to reach the location where the brothers' remains had been left. The work was slow and dangerous, with constant concerns about cave-ins and toxic gases that had accumulated in the abandoned workings over the decades. After 3 weeks of careful excavation and recovery work, the teams finally located the remains of Marcus and Danny Caldwell in a chamber nearly 200 feet below the surface. Along with their bodies, they found the backpacks and equipment the brothers had been carrying when they disappeared, preserved by the dry conditions in the abandoned mine. Most importantly, they recovered additional documentation that Marcus had hidden in his pack, including photographs of the mining operation and detailed notes about the people involved in running it. The discovery provided the closure that the Caldwell family had been seeking for 16 years, but it also opened up a much larger investigation into the network of corruption and violence that had operated in the Colorado mountains during the 1980s. Federal prosecutors eventually brought charges against 12 individuals connected to the illegal mining operation, including 2 former government officials who had been bribed to provide false permits and look the other way, while millions of dollars worth of minerals were stolen from public land. For Robert and Helen Caldwell, the truth was both a relief and a devastating confirmation of their worst fears. Their sons hadn't died from a hiking accident or natural disaster. They had been murdered for trying to do the right thing. But finally, knowing what had happened to Marcus and Danny allowed them to properly grieve and begin the healing process that had been impossible during 16 years of uncertainty. The funeral service for the Caldwell brothers was held on a brilliant autumn day in Boulder, with hundreds of people attending to pay their respects to 2 young men whose courage and integrity had ultimately cost them their lives. The service was a celebration of their lives and their refusal to compromise their principles, even when faced with mortal danger. Detective Martinez stood with the family as Marcus and Danny were finally laid to rest in the Flatiron Cemetery, with a view of the Rocky Mountains where they had spent so many happy days before their final tragic expedition. The case that had defined her career was officially closed, but the impact of what they had discovered would continue to resonate through the law enforcement community for years to come. The revelations about the illegal mining operation and the murder of the Caldwell brothers sent shockwaves through Colorado's law enforcement and political communities. The federal investigation that followed uncovered a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of state government, implicating officials who had been trusted with protecting Colorado's natural resources, but had instead been profiting from their exploitation. Senator James Morrison, who had served Colorado in the U.S. Senate since 1978, was among the officials whose bank records revealed suspicious payments during the years when the illegal mining operation was active. Morrison had been a vocal advocate for mining interests throughout his career, but the discovery of over $300,000 in unexplained deposits to his personal accounts during the early 1980s suggested his support had been purchased rather than principled. The investigation revealed that Morrison had used his influence to ensure that federal oversight of mining activities in remote areas was minimal, and that reports of suspicious activity were buried in bureaucratic processes that prevented proper investigation. His office had received at least 3 reports of unusual mining activity in the area where the Caldwell brothers had been killed, but no action had been taken on any of them. When confronted with the evidence, Morrison initially denied any wrongdoing, claiming the payments were legitimate consulting fees for work he had done with mining companies before entering the Senate. But bank records showed the payments had continued throughout his time in office, and their timing corresponded perfectly with key votes and legislative actions that benefited the illegal mining operation. The scandal destroyed Morrison's political career and led to criminal charges for accepting bribes and conspiracy to defraud the federal government. His conviction sent a clear message that even powerful politicians couldn't escape justice for their role in crimes that had cost innocent lives. The case became a landmark in federal prosecution of corruption cases involving natural resource crimes. But the political ramifications were only part of the broader impact that the Caldwell brothers case had on Colorado and the nation. The investigation revealed that illegal mining operations had been far more widespread than anyone had previously realized, with similar schemes operating in remote areas throughout the western United States. The profits from these operations had funded other criminal activities, including drug trafficking and money laundering networks that spanned multiple states. Detective Martinez found herself at the center of a multi-state task force dedicated to investigating similar operations in other remote areas. The techniques and evidence analysis methods developed during the Caldwell investigation became the standard for cold case investigations involving organized crime in wilderness areas. The case was studied at law enforcement academies across the country as an example of how modern technology could be combined with traditional detective work to solve crimes that had remained mysteries for decades. For the Caldwell family, the broader implications of the case were less important than the personal closure they had finally achieved. Helen Caldwell, who had spent 16 years wondering what had happened to her sons, found a renewed sense of purpose in working with other families of missing persons. She established the Marcus and Danny Caldwell Foundation, which provided resources and support for families dealing with unsolved disappearances in wilderness areas. The foundation funded advanced search and rescue equipment for mountain communities throughout Colorado, ensuring that future search operations would have access to the kind of technology that had finally solved her son's case. More importantly, it provided emotional support and practical assistance to families who were struggling with the uncertainty and grief that she knew so well from her own experience. Robert Caldwell channeled his grief into advocacy for stronger oversight of mining activities on public lands. He worked with environmental groups and law enforcement agencies to develop better systems for monitoring remote areas and detecting illegal mining operations before they could harm both the environment and innocent people who might discover them. Their daughter Lisa, now 34 and a mother of 2 children, had struggled for years to come to terms with the loss of her brothers and the way their disappearance had transformed her family. The discovery of the truth about their deaths was difficult, but it also allowed her to finally understand why her parents had been consumed by their search for answers. She began working with the foundation her mother had established, focusing on helping children and teenagers who had lost family members to unsolved crimes. The site where Marcus and Danny Caldwell had been murdered was eventually designated as a memorial area, with a plaque honoring their memory and their courage in standing up for what was right, despite the personal cost. The illegal mining operations equipment and structures were completely removed, and the area was restored to its natural state as much as possible. The abandoned mine shaft where their bodies had been found was permanently sealed to prevent future accidents, but not before a small ceremony was held there by family members and friends who wanted to pay their respects at the actual location where the brothers had died. The ceremony was private and somber, attended only by those who had known and loved Marcus and Danny, and who understood the significance of finally being able to visit the place where their lives had ended. Detective Martinez retired from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office 5 years after solving the Caldwell case, but the investigation remained the defining achievement of her career. She wrote a book about the case that became a bestseller and helped raise awareness about the ongoing problem of crimes committed in remote wilderness areas. The book's proceeds were donated to the Marcus and Danny Caldwell Foundation, continuing to support the work that had grown out of the tragedy. The case also led to significant changes in how missing persons cases in wilderness areas are investigated. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation established new protocols for cold case reviews, ensuring that cases like the Caldwell brothers' disappearance would be regularly re-examined using the latest available technology and investigative techniques. Federal land management agencies implemented new monitoring systems for detecting unauthorized activities in remote areas using satellite imagery and other advanced technologies to identify suspicious activities before they could escalate into situations that might endanger innocent visitors. The changes were partly motivated by the desire to prevent future tragedies, like the one that had claimed the lives of Marcus and Danny Caldwell. 25 years after their disappearance, the Caldwell brothers were remembered not just as victims of a terrible crime, but as young men whose integrity and courage had ultimately led to positive changes that would protect others in the future. Their story became a testament to the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous, and to the power of persistence in seeking justice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. The map that Marcus had drawn during his final days, the document that had ultimately led to solving the mystery of their disappearance, was preserved in the Colorado State Archives as a historical artifact. It served as a reminder of one young man's determination to leave behind the truth, even when he knew that the cost of that truth might be his life and his brother's life. The impact of the Caldwell brothers' case extended far beyond the borders of Colorado, inspiring changes in federal law enforcement approaches to crimes committed on public lands across the United States. The FBI established a specialized unit focused on investigating organized criminal activities in remote wilderness areas, using the investigative methods pioneered during the Caldwell case as their operational foundation. The unit's first major success came just 2 years after its formation, when they uncovered a similar illegal mining operation in the mountains of Montana that had been operating for over a decade. Using satellite imagery analysis and ground-penetrating radar techniques developed during the Caldwell investigation, agents were able to locate and shut down the operation before any civilians were harmed. The Montana case resulted in 17 arrests and the recovery of over $12 million in stolen precious metals. Dr. Patricia Wells, the mining historian who had been part of the original Caldwell investigation team, became the leading expert on historical illegal mining operations in the American West. Her research revealed that such operations had been far more common than previously understood, with criminal networks exploiting remote areas throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. Her work helped law enforcement agencies identify patterns of criminal activity that had been hidden in historical records for over a century. The technology used to solve the Caldwell case also found applications in other types of cold case investigations. Ground-penetrating radar units were deployed to investigate dozens of missing persons cases across the western United States, leading to the discovery of remains and evidence that had been hidden for decades. The techniques became standard equipment for search and rescue teams, dramatically improving their ability to locate missing persons in wilderness areas. Thomas Brennan, the hiker who had discovered Marcus Caldwell's map, became an advocate for wilderness safety and education. He worked with the National Park Service to develop programs that taught hikers and campers how to recognize signs of illegal activities in remote areas and how to safely report their observations to authorities. His programs emphasized the importance of documenting evidence while prioritizing personal safety, lessons drawn directly from the tragic experience of the Caldwell brothers. The legal precedents established by the federal prosecutions related to the Caldwell case strengthened the government's ability to pursue corruption cases involving natural resource crimes. The successful convictions of Senator Morrison and other officials involved in the conspiracy sent a clear message that public officials would be held accountable for their role in criminal enterprises that exploited public lands and endangered innocent lives. Environmental groups used the Caldwell case to advocate for stronger protections for wilderness areas and better monitoring of activities on public lands. The case demonstrated how criminal exploitation of natural resources could lead to violence against innocent people, providing a powerful argument for increased funding for land management agencies and law enforcement presence in remote areas. The Marcus and Danny Caldwell Foundation grew into a national organization that provided support for families of missing persons and funded advanced search and rescue capabilities for mountain communities across the United States. The Foundation's work was particularly focused on cases involving young people who had disappeared in wilderness areas, recognizing that such cases often received less attention and resources than missing persons cases in urban areas. Helen Caldwell, despite being in her 70s, remained actively involved in the Foundation's work until her death in 2003. Her tireless advocacy for missing persons families had helped hundreds of other families navigate the complex emotional and practical challenges of dealing with unexplained disappearances. Her funeral was attended by families from across the country whose lives had been touched by her compassion and determination. Robert Caldwell continued his advocacy work for mining safety and environmental protection until his own death in 2005. His efforts had contributed to significant improvements in oversight of mining activities on public lands and had helped prevent other illegal operations from claiming innocent lives. His carpentry skills, which had been set aside during the years of searching for his sons, were channeled into building memorial structures for other families who had lost loved ones to unsolved crimes. Lisa Caldwell, now known by her married name, Lisa Caldwell Morrison, no relation to the disgraced senator, had become a licensed clinical social worker specializing in helping families cope with traumatic loss. Her personal experience with the long-term impact of unresolved grief made her uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. She often spoke at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement officers, helping them understand the family perspective on cold case investigations. Detective Martinez's book about the Caldwell case, titled The Map to Truth: How Two Brothers' Final Message Solved Their Own Murder, became required reading at several law enforcement academies and graduate programs in criminal justice. The book's detailed account of the investigation process provided valuable insights into how cold cases could be successfully resolved using a combination of modern technology and traditional detective work. The case also had a lasting impact on the outdoor recreation community in Colorado and throughout the American West. Hiking groups and outdoor clubs began incorporating safety education about recognizing and reporting suspicious activities in remote areas. The tragic fate of the Caldwell brothers served as a sobering reminder that even experienced outdoor enthusiasts could encounter dangers beyond the natural hazards of wilderness recreation. Memorial services for Marcus and Danny Caldwell were held annually on the anniversary of their disappearance, bringing together family members, friends, law enforcement officers, and community members who had been touched by their story. The services evolved over the years into celebrations of their lives and the positive changes that had emerged from the tragedy of their deaths. The remote valley where the illegal mining operation had been conducted was eventually incorporated into the Roosevelt National Forest as a designated wilderness area, ensuring that it would be protected from future exploitation. A small memorial plaque near the trailhead honored not only Marcus and Danny Caldwell, but all victims of crimes committed in America's wilderness areas. Vincent Torino, the former security coordinator who had confessed to orchestrating the murders of the Caldwell brothers, died in federal prison in 2004 while serving a life sentence for his crimes. His death marked the end of the legal proceedings related to the case, but his detailed confessions continued to provide valuable intelligence for investigations of other cold cases involving organized crime in remote areas. The abandoned mine shaft, where the brothers' bodies had been found, was eventually converted into a research site for forensic anthropology students, allowing future investigators to train using real-world scenarios while treating the location with the respect it deserved as a place where innocent lives had been lost. As the 20th anniversary of the case's resolution approached in 2018, the story of Marcus and Danny Caldwell continued to resonate with new generations of law enforcement officers, outdoor enthusiasts, and families dealing with missing persons cases. Their legacy lived on through the improved investigative techniques, stronger legal protections, and support systems that had emerged from the tragedy of their deaths. The truth that had been hidden in the Colorado mountains for 16 years had finally emerged, not only bringing closure to one family, but creating positive changes that would protect and help countless others in the years to come. The map that Marcus Caldwell had drawn during his final days, intended as a message from beyond the grave, had indeed revealed a chilling truth. But it had also become a catalyst for justice and positive change that extended far beyond what anyone could have imagined when two young brothers set out on what should have been a simple hiking trip in the autumn of 1982.